Dear students, in the last few sessions, we were learning about the sex structure of the population. We have also looked at what are the main factors influencing sex structure, like sex ratio at birth. Today, we will be learning on another aspect which can influence the sex ratio, sex differentials, which is sex differentials in mortality. So, in this session, we will look at what is the mortality pattern for male and female and the gender differences in mortality, and also perhaps the main reasons for gender difference in mortality in the context of India. As all of you may be aware, gender equality is currently a subject matter of the world policies and policy instruments to enhance and sustain economic development process. The issue of gender equality within the lens of development paradigm is not a new phenomena. It has been a consensus that among the global community that gender equality is mandatory for achieving development goals. But the United Nations, by as early as in 1948, made different endorsement to make to prevent sex-based discrimination and gender disparity. In the 6th Beijing Platform for Action, the UN member states committed to promoting economic rights of women and eliminate gender-based discrimination. In the recently concluded Millennium Development Goals, gender equality came as one of the strong objectives to be achieved for overall Millennium Development Goals. Later, in the Sustainable Development Goal, which has been launched a couple of years back, also emphasized the role of women and women's equality, gender equality, as a critical objective for achieving sustainable development goals. If you consider sustainable development goal, which is generally known as SDG, the goal 5 particularly emphasizes that gender goal is important and all forms of discrimination against women and girls should be eliminated. Gender difference in mortality or gender differentials in life expectancy in a country or a region is a specific form of gender disparity or gender discrimination which we observe in different forms in a country. But in most of the countries, life expectancy of females is higher as a group. Female live longer than male due to biological advantage of female. However, it is observed that in India and in several other countries of South Asia, where male-female life expectancy at birth is nearly same or marginally higher in recent years. Due to higher chances of infant mortality or higher chances of child mortality among females, the difference in female male life expectancy is less in India compared to which is observed in many developed countries. So, this is in fact a matter of great concern. While biologically the females are expected to live longer than males, in many countries like in India, this is not seen through the available data. So, this is why in many of these countries like in India, there is an alarmingly low sex ratio indicating that the number of females for every 1000 males is significantly lower than the expected normal sex ratio. In 1901, in India, the sex ratio was around 972 per thousand, and but by 1971 it has decreased to 930, and again recorded a further dip to 1927 per females per thousand males in the year 2001. So, all these indicate not only a worsening sex ratio, which in fact a reflection of a worsening perhaps the gender differentials in mortality in the earlier years. As we have already learned in the earlier class, in recent times the sex ratio imbalance is also created by the sex selective abortions and not merely the sex differentials in mortality. So, gender differentials in mortality is sort of a universal recognition, although it varies significantly across countries. While in countries where there is no gender discrimination, obviously the life expectancy among females will be much higher than that of males. But in India, because of the persisting issues of gender discrimination which is taking place in the country, the female mortality rates are comparatively higher. As a result, the differentials in the life expectancy is also rather narrower. Historically, if you look at the under 5 mortality rates, that is the mortality rate between the ages 0 to 4 years, has been much higher among females than males in India. To some extent, this has been continued even now, although this has significantly narrowed in recent years. It is also found that in a survey, out of the 44 countries the survey was conducted, which is the demographic health survey, 27 of these countries had a child mortality rate higher for girls than boys. This is a very significant information indicating that not only in India, but many other countries of the world which belongs to the developing countries or poor countries of the world, there is still continues to have a gender discrimination which result in high instance of infant mortality and child mortality among females as compared to males. In India, among the females, the neonatal mortality, which is the mortality in the age group 0 to 28 days after birth, meaning within the first month of the birth, infant mortality rate, which is the mortality between 0 to 1 year, that is less than 1 year of age, and under 5 mortality, which is the mortality in the age group 0 to 4 years, are higher for females than males throughout almost last century, except in few years. In fact, it is also found that generally the neonatal mortality, which is taking place within the first month after the birth of a baby, is normally will have definite advantages for the females. Biologically, undoubtedly, females are expected to have better advantages in mortality in the neonatal stages. This is also nearly found in all population groups, even in countries like India, primarily because during the very early stage of the child, during the period of birth, it is unlikely that there is a clear discrimination against the child, because the child is solely dependent on mother's milk, and as a result, even when there is an overt discrimination taking place, that may not reflect directly into a situation of survival or the mortality. But the sex differentials in mortality primarily happens in the post-neonatal period of a child, meaning between 1 month to 1 year period, which is often known as post-neonatal mortality. Post-neonatal mortality is computed as the mortality between 1 month to 1 year divided by the total number of births in a country in a particular year. If you look at India, the post-neonatal mortality invariably has been higher in the 3 rounds of large scale surveys conducted in 91, 92, 98, 99 and 2005-06. This survey in India is known as National Family Health Survey, NFHS, which gives information on post-neonatal mortality and infant mortality rate in the country. Invariably, in all the 3 rounds of the surveys, the post-neonatal mortality has been higher among females as compared to males. The similar pattern you might observe if you look at infant mortality rate as well. Although majority of the infant deaths take place within the first month after the delivery, which is known as the neonatal mortality, where we hardly observe a significant gender differentials in mortality unfavorable to females. It is the overall infant mortality rate also may not reflect that much on the intensity of the gender differentials in mortality in the younger ages. However, it is also observed that in India, in most part of the last century, the infant mortality rate among the females has been higher than males. The infant mortality rate by sex of the children and by the place of residence by rural and urban data also shows nearly the similar pattern. So, as I already pointed out, infant mortality is defined as the number of deaths which is taking place in a country in the period in the years less than 1 year divided by the number of live births taking place in that particular country per into 1000 live births. IMR at national level is reported to be 37 and ranged from 41 in rural areas and 25 in urban areas in the country. Among the states and union territories, it ranged from a lowest of 12 in Kerala and to a highest of 50 in Madhya Pradesh. It indicates that not only there is huge variation in the infant mortality rate in the country across states, there is also pockets of high gender disparity or gender discrimination in mortality in different parts of the country. Invariably, IMR is higher for females compared to males in many states of the country. There are exceptions, but these exceptions are few, like in Himachal Pradesh. Among all the states and union territories, Bihar reported almost the highest infant mortality rate for females, while the Madhya Pradesh has reported the highest infant mortality rate for male. It also to some extent indicates that the states having high infant mortality rate particularly located in the north, also have a high infant mortality rate among females, or the gender differentials in mortality, infant mortality is also higher in these places where infant mortality rate is relatively higher. If you look at the rural areas of Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan, there is relatively high infant mortality rate among females, whereas in urban areas of Bihar and Uttarakhand, there is highest infant mortality rate among females in India. Let us turn back to the next major age group for mortality, which is the under 5 mortality. As all of you may be aware, the mortality rate among the children are highest from when they are young in the neonatal stages, followed in the post-neonatal stages, and later in the child stages. So, under 5 mortality is the mortality rate between the age group 0 to 4 years. At the national level, the under 5 mortality rate is estimated to be 43 per 1000 live births, and it varies between 48 in rural areas and 28 in urban areas. Among the bigger states and union territories, it varies from as low as 13 in Kerala to the highest level of 62 in the case of Assam. All the states and union territories have higher under 5 mortality rates of females than that of males, except a few states like Himachal Pradesh, Odisha, Punjab and Madhya Pradesh. Assam and Rajasthan have highest under 5 female mortality rate, which is 66 and 56 respectively. Gender gap in under 5 mortality rate is much higher in the states of Rajasthan, Bihar, Jharkhand and Assam. Thus, excessive female mortality rate in India is a sign of explicit and implicit discrimination in favor of daughters as compared to the son. We have now learned what is the major pattern of female mortality rate exist in the country and what are the major aspects of the gender differentials in mortality. Now, it is important to look into the causes of such excess female deaths in the context of India. As all of you are aware, females are expected to be living longer and expected to have lower mortality rate at each and every age group, irrespective of whether at the time of birth or later part of their life. Therefore, any excess female mortality rate in any age group definitely represents a female discrimination which is taking place within the context of the country. So, let us turn back why actually there is an excess female deaths which is observed in many parts of the country. Firstly, the son preference undoubtedly is expected to be the major reasons for female discrimination which is taking place in many parts of the country. Son preference is hypothesized as one of the main reasons for the prevalence of excess female child mortality. Further, in South Asia, including India, preferring sons over daughters continues to be strong even with substantial socio-economic and demographic changes which has taken place in these countries over a longer period. There are several factors influencing son preference in mortality. There are several factors influencing the son preference in a particular region. Socioeconomic, religious, and cultural factors undoubtedly influence son preference. Moreover, the financial support, the old age security, property inheritance, dowry, family lineage, prestige and power all are part of the reasons for a very strong son preference in the context of India. In fact, the excess female child mortality rates is nearly the consequence of their strong son preference, and various discriminatory and behavioral practices in feeding, healthcare utilization, and poor expanse of girls in health conditions are inflicted on female children to achieve this discriminatory objective. Let us look at some of the major factors influencing gender differentials in mortality. Firstly, one has to say, in case the female deaths are higher than male deaths, which is against the normal pattern, it has to be through a discrimination in nutrition. What does it indicate? It indicates that there is a gender discrimination which is happening among the children in breastfeeding practices, vaccination, and nutritional status depends on the birth order of the child, of the living children, of the child living siblings. Usually, girls have lower level of immunization and breastfeeding during the childhood, which leads to poor health conditions and excess children's death. It is also found that there is significant discrimination in nutrition among the girl children as compared to the boys, partly because of the discrimination in breastfeeding as well as the discrimination in sharing food within the family. This became more prominent over time and space. In the case of immunization coverage, the girls are discriminated to receive immunization in the north of the country, particularly in families with no living sons. If you look at the available nutrition data, it is often found that the girls are more severely stunted than boys. Girls are less received any or all vaccinations, and so on. Sometimes the nutrition and immunization during the childhood is also depend on the sex composition of the surviving children. Meaning, if the previous child was a female or girl, the subsequent child will receive less nutrition and immunization in case that child also continues, a child is also a girl child. The second ways to inflict a discrimination for the girl child, which can lead to a unfavorable mortality condition, is through gender discrimination in healthcare utilization and healthcare spending. The utilization of healthcare facility for male-female is not same in India. Due to poor socioeconomic status of the females in a society, female dependent on the male member of the household to visit healthcare facilities. In India, females have often lesser chance to be hospitalized for various health conditions and morbidity as compared to the males. Parents often prefer boys over girls to provide quality of healthcare services and more frequently visit healthcare services. If you look at the utilization of healthcare services data, it is found that the education and economic status of female educated mother used more antenatal care, postnatal care facility and institutional delivery than illiterate. But at the same time, the level of untreated morbidity is much higher among females in India. So, there are also several other socio-economic factors which influence gender differentials in mortality, but the role of these factors are still not established very clearly. For instance, in the case of level of education, it is often found that the educated mother, infant mortality and child mortality is lesser for both males and females as compared to illiterate women. At the same time, if you look at the gender differentials in mortality between educated and uneducated, you may not find that much significant difference in the gender differential in mortality, indicating that the gender preference perhaps is nearly universal than nearly only concentrated in certain sections of the society. At the macro level, if you look at the states which have high levels of female literacy like in Kerala, Karnataka or in southern parts of the country, with relatively high female education levels have shown less discrimination towards girls. But in the past 20 years, high female literacy has not stopped Delhi and Tamil Nadu from showing increased discrimination against female children. Let us look at the aspect of poverty, whether not providing adequate nutrition to the female child is because of the intense poverty within the household and because of the scarcity of food in equally sharing among all the children within the family. In a patriarchal society like in India, males are more economically valuable than females undoubtedly. Poor parents face hardship in financing conditions of limited resources and therefore prefer to invest these resources on sons and providing food and perhaps the quality healthcare services. However, there seems to be no strong correlation between poverty and gender discrimination in health or even in the distribution of the food, and also, as we have already pointed out, even in gender differentials in mortality. While 4 states larger in population size and high poverty levels like Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Bihar and Rajasthan have always shown poor sex ratio and high levels of child mortality among girls, it is also found to be true in many other contexts. Therefore, it is difficult to conclude what is the relationship between the poverty, the level of education as well as other socio-economic developmental factors on the gender differentials in mortality. What does it all indicate? Firstly, there exists very strong son preference in the country, which has a direct implications or impact on the gender discrimination in the country. The female children, particularly at the early ages, has been discriminated, leading to high infant and child mortality. This is very clearly evident in the post-neonatal stages. As a result, the sex ratio in the past has been nearly solely influenced by the gender differentials in mortality. Perhaps over a period of time, the situation has changed. The infant mortality rate has fallen, and at the same time, still we see the gender differentials in mortality exist. Interestingly enough, the socio-economic and demographic factors influence on gender differentials in mortality is still unclear. It is not only among the poor, illiterate and uneducated society that gender discrimination exists. Gender discrimination in India appears to be a universal phenomena which encompasses all sections of the society, and a clear gender discrimination is also observed in terms of health facility, provision of the health facility to the female children as well as the females. Therefore, it is important to bring out corrective measures and policy measures to improve the survival chances of female children in India, which can also lead to improvement in the overall sex ratio. There are several policies are suggested, and these policies has to be followed to achieve this objective. Thank you.